Did you know that when the Martian war machines first appeared on screen in 1953, the actors weren't looking at special effects? They were staring at nothing but empty air and wooden sticks held by crew members. The screams were real because the director wanted genuine fear, not pretend emotions. War of the Worlds wasn't just another science fiction movie. It was an experiment in terror, test of what happens when you make people believe the impossible is real. The film came just 15 years after Orson Welles' famous radio broadcast that made thousands of Americans think Martians had actually invaded Earth. Hollywood wanted to bring that same panic to the big screen, but in gorgeous Technicolor. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about the War of the Worlds. Number 20. The machines that couldn't walk. The Martian war machines are some of the most famous alien spacecraft in movie history. But here's something strange. They were never supposed to float. In H.G. Wells's original book from 1898, the author described them crushing houses under massive metal feet, striding across the English countryside with enormous steps. But when producer George Pal and his team sat down to figure out how to bring these tripods to life, they hit a wall. This was 1953. There were no computers. There was no digital animation. Everything had to be built by hand, moved by hand, filmed by hand. The special effects artists tried dozens of designs. They built small models with 3 legs and tried to make them walk using wires and puppets. It looked terrible. The legs wobbled. The movement seemed silly instead of scary. No matter what they tried, the walking tripods looked like toys, not terrifying alien weapons. So the team made a bold choice, threw out the legs completely. Instead, they designed machines that floated through the air, held up by invisible force fields. The new war machines had sleek cobra-like heads mounted on long necks. They glided smoothly over the ground, silent and deadly, like sharks moving through water. This wasn't what the book described, but it worked perfectly on film. The floating design became so iconic that most people today forget the Martians were ever supposed to walk. Sometimes the best solutions come from accepting what you cannot do. Number 19. The preacher who wouldn't stop praying. One of the movie's most powerful scenes shows a desperate minister walking toward the Martian war machines with his Bible held high, reciting the 23rd Psalm. He believes his faith will protect him. He believes God will stop the alien. He's wrong. The Martians vaporize him with their heat ray and a blinding flash of light. It's a shocking moment that tells the audience nobody is safe, not even the faithful. But filming this scene became a strange test of endurance for the actor playing the minister, Louis Martin. Director Byron Haskin wanted the prayer to feel absolutely real, so he asked Martin to recite the entire psalm from memory, word perfect, while walking slowly toward the camera. The film crew had set up the special effects rig that would create the heat ray blast, but the timing had to be exact. Martin needed to reach a specific mark on the ground at the precise moment he finished the psalm. Martin recited that psalm so many times, he said later he could never forget it, even decades after the movie. His voice became hoarse. His legs grew tired from walking the same path again and again. Haskin kept pushing, demanding perfection. When you watch the final version, you see a man who looks genuinely exhausted, genuinely desperate. 18. The color that didn't exist. The War of the Worlds was filmed in Technicolor, which in 1953 was still considered expensive and special. Most movies were still made in black and white. Color was reserved for big-budget productions, biblical epics, and lavish music. George Pal insisted on Technicolor because he wanted the Martian attacks to feel overwhelming and beautiful at the same time. He wanted colors that would burn into the audience's memory. The art department faced an unusual challenge. What color should alien technology be? There was no reference point. Nobody had ever seen a real Martian war machine. Designers experimented with different combinations. They painted test models silver, like traditional rockets and airplanes. Too boring. They tried black, thinking it would look menacing. Too hard to see in dark scenes. They tested bright red, too much like a fire truck. Finally, a young painter on the crew mixed up a custom color that had never been used in movies before, a kind of glowing copper green that seemed to shift depending on the light. It looked metallic, but also organic, like the shell of a strange beetle. When they added luminescent paint that would glow under ultraviolet light, the effect became even more alien. War machines seemed to pulse with their own inner energy. This mysterious color had no official name. The crew just called it Martian green. Later, when other science fiction movies wanted to copy the look, they couldn't quite match it because there was no paint formula written down. The exact mixture was lost when the original props were damaged and repainted years later. That specific shade of alien green existed for only a brief moment in time, captured forever on film but impossible to recreate. Some colors live and die with the artists who dream them up. Number 17. The church that played every religion about halfway through the movie. There's a scene where panicked crowds storm into a church seeking shelter from the Martian invasion. The camera shows people of all kinds praying together, some kneeling, some standing, some crying. The church set was built on a Paramount Studios soundstage, but the art department received unusual instructions. Make it look like it belongs to every faith and no faith at the same time. The producers didn't want to show a specific Catholic church or Protestant church or any particular denomination. This was a movie about all of humanity facing extinction, so they wanted a place of worship that felt universal. The set designers created something strange and beautiful. They built walls that suggested a church but included no crosses, no specific religious symbols. No clear indication of what kind of building it was supposed to be. The windows were plain-colored glass without saints or scripture. The altar was simple and bare. If you look closely during that scene, you'll notice people praying in different ways. Some have rosary beads, some don't. Some cover their heads, some don't. The filmmakers hired extras from different religious backgrounds and told them to pray however felt natural to them. This created a powerful effect on screen. You see humanity united in fear and hope, each person calling out to whatever God they believe in. It also created confusion on set. Extras asked which religion they were supposed to be portraying. The answer was always the same: your own. This wasn't about one faith. This was about faith itself, the human need to believe in something larger when everything else falls apart. The church that belonged to everyone belonged to no one. Somehow, that made it perfect. Number 16. The sound of screaming metal. The Martian heat ray has one of the most recognizable sound effects in science fiction history, a rising electronic shriek that builds to an unbearable pitch before everything explodes. That sound haunted children's nightmares for years after the movie came out. People said it sounded like a giant insect screaming. Others said it was like feedback from a broken radio. Nobody could quite describe it, which was exactly what the sound designers wanted. Creating that noise was incredibly difficult. Remember, in 1953, there were no synthesizers, no computer-generated sounds, no digital audio. Everything had to be made using real physical objects and recorded on magnetic tape. The sound team tried everything. They recorded air raid sirens and played them backward. They scraped metal against metal. They recorded feedback from amplifiers. Nothing felt alien enough. Then, one of the technicians had a strange idea. He took 3 electric guitars, removed most of the strings, and hooked them up to amplifiers turned to maximum volume. Then he didn't play the guitars normally. Instead, he ran the remaining strings through a device that created electronic interference. He manipulated the feedback, bending the pitch up and down. At the same time, another technician scraped a violin bow across a saw blade and recorded that sound separately. They combined the electronic guitar feedback with the singing saw, then added the sound of high-tension wires vibrating in wind. They mixed all 3 sounds together, layered them, and adjusted the speed. The result was something that had never been heard before, a noise that seemed to come from outside human experience. It didn't sound like a weapon. It sounded like reality itself tearing apart. Even the crew members got chills when they first heard it played back at full volume through the studio speakers. That sound of screaming metal and electronic pain became the voice of alien death, and it was created by 3 broken guitars and a musical saw. Number 15. The actress who was really a scientist, Anne Robinson, played Sylvia Van Buren, the female lead and love interest in the film. Most people assume she was just another Hollywood actress hired for her looks. But Anne Robinson had a secret background that made her perfect for a science fiction movie. Before she became an actress, she studied biology and had seriously considered becoming a medical researcher. She understood scientific terminology. She could pronounce complicated words without stumbling. She knew how laboratories worked. When the script called for her character to assist the hero scientist, played by Gene Barry, Robinson actually understood what the props were supposed to represent. She could handle the fake laboratory equipment with confidence, because she had used real versions in college. Director Byron Haskin was amazed during her screen test. Most actresses would pick up a beaker or test tube awkwardly, obviously having no idea what it was for. Robinson handled everything naturally. She looked like she belonged in a laboratory. There's a scene where her character examines a piece of the Martian war machine under a microscope and discusses its strange properties. Robinson played it perfectly because she had actually spent hours looking through microscopes during her education. Subtle authenticity that most science fiction movies of that era lacked. Later in her life, Robinson said that Sylvia Van Buren was her favorite role specifically because the character wasn't just a screaming victim. Sylvia was educated, brave, and useful. She helped solve problems instead of just needing rescue. Robinson understood that kind of woman because she was that kind of woman. Hollywood in the 1950s rarely let female characters be intelligent and glamorous at the same time, but The War of the Worlds managed it, partly because they accidentally hired an actress who had almost chosen science over stardom. Sometimes real knowledge shines through, even in make-believe stories. Number 14. The Crash That Became Famous. The movie's most spectacular destruction scene shows a Martian war machine smashing directly into a building in Los Angeles. The camera follows the glowing spacecraft as it glides through the air, then suddenly drops and crashes through the roof of a house in a shower of debris and sparks. It's a stunning visual that looks incredibly dangerous and expensive. The truth is even more interesting. That building wasn't a real house and wasn't a painting. It was an incredibly detailed miniature model built at 1/6 scale. Model makers spent 6 weeks constructing a perfect replica of a typical Los Angeles home, complete with tiny shingles on the roof, miniature window frames, even small pieces of furniture visible through the windows. They built it specifically to be destroyed. The war machine that crashes through the roof was also a model, about 3 feet long, hanging from very thin wires. The special effects team rigged the miniature house with small explosive charges hidden throughout the structure. They would get only one chance to film this. Once they destroyed the model, it was gone forever. No second takes, no do-overs. They set up 5 cameras at different angles, loaded with high-speed film so they could slow down the destruction and make it look even more dramatic. When everything was ready, they released the war machine model and triggered the explosives. The miniature house disintegrated in a cloud of splinters and dust. The war machine crashed through exactly as planned. All 5 cameras captured it perfectly. But here's the weird part. That single shot of a model being destroyed became so famous that it was reused in other movies and television shows for years afterward. If you watch certain science fiction and disaster films from the 1950s and 60s, you'll occasionally spot that exact same footage of the Martian war machine crashing through the house. The production companies kept reusing it because it looked so good and was too expensive to recreate. One moment of miniature destruction lived on in dozens of different stories. That model house achieved a strange kind of immortality by being completely demolished. Number 13. The fire that wasn't fire, the Martian heat ray, sets everything on fire. Buildings explode in flames, cars melt, forests burn. Fire is everywhere in this movie, consuming the world in waves of destruction. But almost none of it was real fire. This sounds impossible because the flames look absolutely convincing on screen, but 1950s film technology had a serious problem with fire. Real flames are incredibly dangerous on a movie set, obviously, but they also create another issue. They're bright orange and yellow, which looks wrong in Technicolor. Real fire tends to wash out on color film, losing detail and looking flat. The special effects team needed fire that was safer and more controllable than real flames, but also more photogenic. Their solution was brilliant and strange. For many of the fire effects, they didn't use fire at all. They used colored steam. The technicians built special machines that would shoot steam mixed with orange and red dye. When filmed at the right angle with the right lighting, the colored steam billowed and rolled exactly like fire and smoke. It glowed. It seemed to consume everything it touched, but it was just hot, colored air. For other scenes, they used a technique called animated fire, where artists literally painted flames onto glass plates, frame by frame. These painted flames were then photographed and combined with the live-action footage using optical printing. The result was fire that looked more intense and vivid than real flames ever could. There were a few scenes that required actual fire, usually outdoor shots where real vegetation was burned under controlled conditions. But the majority of the apocalyptic burning you see on screen was created through a combination of steam, lighting, and hand-painted animation. The audience never knew the difference. They saw a world being consumed by alien weapons, but what they were really watching was colored steam and painted glass. Sometimes the most convincing lies are built from vapor and art. Number 11. The atomic bomb that failed near the film's climax, the military makes a desperate decision they'll use an atomic bomb against the Martians. If conventional weapons can't stop the invasion, maybe the most powerful weapon humanity has ever created will work. The scene shows an atomic mushroom cloud rising over the Martian war machines, a terrifying and spectacular sight. For a moment, the characters hope it worked. Then the smoke clears, and the Martian machines emerge completely undamaged. Their force fields protected them even from nuclear fire. This scene was controversial when the movie was released in 1953 because World War II had ended only 8 years earlier. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were still fresh in everyone's memory. Nuclear weapons weren't just movie props. They were real, terrible things that had killed hundreds of thousands of people. Some people thought showing an atomic bomb in an entertainment film was disrespectful or dangerous. Others argued the scene carried an important message. Human weapons, even the worst ones, were useless against a truly alien threat. But there was another layer to this that most audiences never knew. The filmmakers consulted with actual military advisors about how an atomic blast would look and what its effects would be. The mushroom cloud footage in the movie was based on real documentary footage of nuclear tests, though it was recreated using special effects rather than actual bomb footage. The military was surprisingly cooperative, providing technical details because they saw the film as a chance to demonstrate American military power, even in a fictional context. They didn't seem bothered that their ultimate weapon fails in the story. What mattered to them was showing that America had atomic bombs and was willing to use them if necessary. So that scene served multiple purposes. It was exciting spectacle. It was philosophical commentary on the limits of human power, and it was subtle Cold War propaganda all at the same time. The bomb that failed on screen carried more weight than just special effects and storytelling. It carried the anxieties of an entire era. Number 10. The Abandoned Farmhouse Secret. One of the movie's longest and most suspenseful sequences takes place in an abandoned farmhouse, where the two main characters hide after their plane crashes. They're trapped inside when a Martian war machine lands partially through the wall, its electronic eye stalk searching the dark rooms for victims. This entire sequence was filmed on a specially constructed set that had a strange feature the audience never sees. The farmhouse interior was built on a platform that could tilt. During the sequence, you can feel the space becoming more claustrophobic, more oppressive, more wrong. That wasn't just good cinematography. The set was literally closing in. The crew would very slightly tilt the platform between shots, just a degree or two, making the walls seem to lean inward. The actors, Anne Robinson and Gene Barry, could feel the floor shifting beneath their feet. This created genuine uneasiness in their performances. They weren't just pretending to be trapped and frightened. They were actually off balance, actually uncomfortable. Director Hoskin never told them what was happening. He wanted their confusion and discomfort to be real. Robinson later said she thought she was losing her mind during filming because the room felt different every time they did another take, but she couldn't figure out why. The walls looked the same. The furniture was in the same positions. Yet something felt wrong. It wasn't until years later that she learned the set had been deliberately designed to create that subtle psychological pressure. But the real secret of the farmhouse sequence is even stranger. Inside the Martian war machine probe that comes through the wall, the mechanical eye stalk that searches for the hiding humans, the filmmakers hit a microphone. They recorded Anne Robinson's breathing and heartbeat while she filmed the scene, then mixed those sounds very quietly into the audio track. So, when you watch that sequence, you're hearing her genuine fear without realizing it. The creature seems to breathe because you're actually hearing the actress breathe. The boundary between human and alien becomes mysteriously blurred. The farmhouse held secrets within secrets, and the terror was built on invisible tilting and hidden heartbeats. Number 9. The bacteria that saved the world. The ending of the War of the Worlds is both triumphant and quiet. After all human weapons fail, after the military is defeated, after cities burn and civilization teeters on the edge of extinction, the Martian invaders suddenly die. Not from bombs or bullets, but from Earth bacteria. The narration explains that the aliens had no immunity to the microscopic organisms that humans live with every day. The smallest creatures defeated the greatest technology. This ending comes directly from H.G. Wells's original novel, and it makes a profound point about nature and arrogance. But filming it created an interesting problem. How do you show bacteria killing aliens in a visually exciting way? You can't see bacteria. They're invisible. The war machines just had to stop working, which isn't very dramatic. The solution came from thinking about what death looks like for machines. The special effects team decided that when the Martian pilots died, their force fields would fail. The war machines would crash. So we see the floating spacecraft suddenly drop from the sky all over the world, their green glow fading, their power gone. Then the filmmakers added something brilliant. In the final shots inside the crashed war machines, we briefly glimpse the Martian creatures themselves. They're withered, dying, pathetic. These are the beings that almost conquered Earth, reduced to three-fingered hands reaching weakly toward nothing. The props department created the Martian bodies, and they looked genuinely disturbing. Not like monsters, but like actual alien life forms that had evolved under different conditions. They had strange skin textures, unusual proportions, eyes that seemed too large and yet somehow too small. They looked wrong in a way that's hard to describe. But here's what most people don't know. Those Martian bodies were supposed to appear much earlier in the film. The original script had a longer sequence where humans capture a Martian and examine it before it dies. That scene was fully filmed but then cut from the final movie because test audiences said it killed the suspense. Once you saw the aliens clearly, they became less frightening. The mystery disappeared. So the footage was mostly removed, saved only for that brief final glimpse. The creatures were hidden through most of the film not for artistic reasons, but because showing them too much made them less scary. Fear lives in what you almost see, not in what's clearly revealed. The bacteria saved the world, but editing saved the suspense. Number 6. The paintings that became prophecy. Before they filmed anything, before they built sets or hired actors, the production team needed to visualize what the Martian invasion would look like. PAL hired a group of concept artists to create paintings showing the war machines attacking cities, the destruction of landmarks, the chaos of invasion. These weren't just sketches, they were fully realized paintings in vibrant color, showing scenes of devastation in incredible detail. The artists painted Los Angeles burning, refugees fleeing in panic, the night sky filled with green light from alien weapons. Some of these paintings were so powerful, so disturbing, that they were never shown to the public. The studio executives worried they were too frightening, too realistic. They showed cities being destroyed with an intensity that felt less like science fiction and more like prediction. Remember, This was 1953. The world had just lived through World War II. People had seen real cities destroyed by firebombing and atomic weapons. The concept paintings hit too close to real trauma. Several of the artists who worked on these pieces later said the experience affected them strangely. They spent weeks imagining and depicting the end of civilization. One painter described working late into the night on a scene showing crowds fleeing through burning streets and suddenly realizing he was painting from memory. His family had fled Berlin during the war, and he was unconsciously recreating that trauma with Martian machines instead of human armies. Another artist painted the destruction of City Hall in Los Angeles so convincingly that when the studio executives saw it, they asked him to tone it down. It looked too much like news footage from a real disaster. But here's the weird part. Decades later, when the 2005 remake of The War of the Worlds was made, the filmmakers looked at those original 1950s concept paintings for inspiration. Some of those images that were considered too disturbing to use in 1953 became the basis for scenes in the modern version. The paintings waited 50 years to finally appear on screen. The artists who created them were long gone by then, but their visions of catastrophe lived on. Art from the past became prophecy for the future, even though both were fiction. The invasion that never happened was imagined twice, generations apart, and the second imagination was built on the first. Number 5. The Voice That Recorded History. Sir Cedric Hardwicke's narration is one of the most distinctive elements of the film. His voice is dignified, serious, touched with sadness, but not despair. He speaks about the Martian invasion with the tone of a historian describing something that really happened long ago. That choice of tone was very deliberate. The filmmakers wanted the narration to sound like someone documenting actual events, not telling a made-up story. So they recorded Hardwicke's narration in an unusual way. Most movie narration is recorded in a soundproof booth with the actor reading from a script. Hardwicke did something different. He insisted on recording while watching the completed scenes. The studio set up a special screening room where Hardwicke could sit and watch the footage while speaking into a microphone. He wanted to react to what he was seeing, to let the images influence his tone and pacing. This meant his narration wasn't just words laid over pictures. It was a performance responding to the film in real time. You can hear it in subtle ways. When he describes the Martian heat ray, his voice tightens slightly, as if he's watching something terrible. When he talks about humanity's defeat, there's genuine sorrow in his tone. He's not just reading, he's witnessing. But the recording sessions revealed something unexpected about Hardwicke. He had lived through both world wars. He had seen London during the Blitz, had experienced real air raids and real destruction. When he spoke about cities burning and civilization threatened, he wasn't imagining fiction. He was remembering reality. Between takes, he would sometimes share stories with the recording engineer about the war, about watching fires consume buildings, about the smell of destruction. Those memories bled into his performance. The weight in his voice when he describes humanity facing extinction, that's not acting technique. That's a man who had seen his own species try very hard to destroy itself and knew it was possible. The narration sounds authentic because, in a way, it is. Hardwicke is describing a Martian invasion, but he's channeling the feeling of real war, real terror, real survival. The fake invasion carried the emotional truth of real conflict. His voice became a bridge between entertainment and memory, between what never happened and what did. Sometimes the most powerful performances come from places we don't expect, from connections between fiction and lived experience that the audience never sees but somehow feels. Number 4. The ending that almost wasn't. The film's final sequence shows the Martian war machines failing all over the world, crashing as their operators die from bacterial infection. Then the survivors emerge from hiding. We see people coming out of churches, looking up at the sky, realizing they're safe. The main characters are reunited. The narrator explains what happened and offers thoughts about humanity's place in God's universe. It's a quiet, hopeful ending that contrasts sharply with all the destruction that came before. But this wasn't the original ending. The first version of the script had something much darker. In that early draft, the bacteria killed the Martians, but the damage to human civilization was so severe that the film ended with the understanding that recovery would take generations. There was no happy reunion. The main characters survived, but were separated in the chaos, never finding each other again. The final image was an empty street covered in debris, with the narrator explaining that humanity had survived but was forever changed. George Pal hated this ending. He fought with the writers about it for weeks. Pal believed that audiences needed hope. They needed to see that survival was possible, that love could endure even through apocalypse. The writers argued that a darker ending was more realistic and more powerful. Pal didn't care about realism. He cared about emotional truth. Finally, he made a bold decision. He ordered the ending completely rewritten and reshot. The studio executives were furious because this meant going over budget. Extra filming meant extra costs. But Pal insisted, even offering to help pay for it himself if necessary. The new ending was written to emphasize faith, survival, and reunion. The main characters find each other in a church, against all odds. It's a happy ending, or at least a hopeful one. When test audiences saw both versions, they overwhelmingly preferred the revised ending. People who watched the darker version left the theater depressed and shaken. People who watched the hopeful version left feeling uplifted despite all the destruction they'd witnessed. The ending that almost wasn't became the ending everyone remembers, and it gave the film a message that has lasted over 70 years. Number 3. The effects that couldn't be filmed. The War of the Worlds was groundbreaking in its special effects. It won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects in 1954, beating every other film that year. The techniques developed for this movie influenced science fiction cinema for decades. But there were several effects that the team desperately wanted to create but couldn't with the technology available. The most ambitious abandoned effect was showing the Martian invasion happening simultaneously all over the world. The script called for scenes of war machines attacking multiple continents: Europe, Asia, Australia, South America. The filmmakers wanted to show the truly global scale of the invasion. They hired artists to design what the attacks would look like in different environments. Martian machines gliding over the Eiffel Tower, war machines rising from the Ganges River, heat rays destroying the pyramids in Egypt. The concept art was spectacular. But actually creating these scenes proved impossible. Each foreign location would require new miniature sets, new models, new matte paintings. The cost became astronomical. Even more problematic, they couldn't figure out how to show these global attacks without breaking the flow of the main story. The film followed two characters trying to survive in California. Cutting away to show Paris burning or Delhi under attack would confuse audiences and slow the pace. Reluctantly, the global invasion scenes were reduced to a few brief shots, stock footage of military forces from different countries, a montage of radio reports, and the narrator explaining what was happening worldwide. The audience had to imagine most of it. But the special effects team never stopped feeling that they'd failed to fully realize the vision. Another abandoned effect was showing the Martian homeworld. The script originally opened with a sequence depicting Mars, its dying civilization, the desperate scientists planning the invasion, the moment the war machines launched toward Earth. This would have made the Martians more sympathetic, showing them as desperate refugees rather than simple villains. Test footage was actually shot showing a desolate Martian landscape built as a miniature set with a red sky and strange rock formations. But it looked wrong. With 1950s technology, Mars just looked like a desert painted red. It wasn't alien enough. Rather than show something that looked cheap, they cut it entirely. The narrator mentions Mars in the opening, but we never see it. Sometimes the most powerful special effects are the ones you don't show, the ones left to imagination. The film succeeded partly because it knew its limits and worked within them. But the artists always wondered what might have been possible with just a little more money, a little more time, a little better technology. Their abandoned dreams waited in concept art and test footage, never seen by audiences, proof that imagination sometimes runs faster than ability. Number 2. The remake that took 50 years. When The War of the Worlds was released in 1953, it was successful, but not a massive blockbuster. It made money. Critics generally liked it. It won its Oscar. Then it slowly faded from mainstream attention, becoming something that science fiction fans remembered fondly but general audiences forgot. For decades, Hollywood periodically discussed remaking it with modern special effects, but nothing came together. Finally, in 2005, Steven Spielberg directed a new version starring Tom Cruise. It was a major summer blockbuster with cutting-edge digital effects. The new film was darker and more intense than the original, but it kept the core story: aliens invade Earth with superior technology, and bacteria ultimately defeats them. When the 2005 version was in development, Spielberg and his team studied the 1953 film carefully. They watched it repeatedly, analyzing what worked and why it had stayed in people's memories for so long. They were particularly impressed by the sound design and the sense of growing dread. Spielberg decided to honor the original in subtle ways. In his version, there's a brief moment where you hear a sound effect that's very similar to the original film's Martian heat ray. It's just a few seconds, a tiny homage that most viewers wouldn't consciously notice, but it connects the two films across 52 years. Even more touching was a decision involving the original cast. Anne Robinson, who played the female lead in the 1953 version, was still alive when the remake was filmed. Spielberg contacted her and asked if she would appear in a small cameo. Robinson, then in her 70s, agreed. She appears in the 2005 film for just a few seconds, playing a grandmother. Gene Barry, the original male lead, also appears briefly. The two actors are on screen together for a moment, just like they were in 1953, though they're playing different characters and neither is identified by name. When they filmed that cameo, Robinson later said she felt strange emotions. She was standing in front of cameras again in a new version of the story that had made her famous over half a century earlier. Everything had changed: the technology, the style, the budget, the world itself. But the story was the same. Humans facing impossible odds. Civilization threatened. Survival uncertain. The essential questions hadn't changed even though everything else had. That continuity meant something to her. Stories outlive the people who tell them. The film she made as a young woman was being reborn for a new generation, and she was there to witness it, to bridge the gap between past and present. The remake that took 50 years became a conversation between two eras, a chance for the old to bless the new. And somewhere in that connection between 1953 and 2005 is a truth about storytelling itself. The good stories never really die. They just sleep, waiting for the right moment to return. Number 1. The question nobody could answer. Throughout production, through all the meetings and script revisions and special effects tests, one question kept coming up that nobody could satisfactorily answer: why do the Martians attack? In H.G. Wells's original novel, the reason is clear: Mars is dying, and the Martians need a new home. They're refugees with superior weapons invading out of desperate necessity. But the movie changed this. The Martians in the film aren't trying to colonize Earth. They just destroy everything. They don't attempt communication. They don't occupy territory. They simply kill and burn and move on. This made them terrifying, but also confusing. What's the point of invading a planet only to make it uninhabitable? The screenwriter tried several explanations. Maybe the Martians just wanted Earth's resources and didn't care about the life already there. Maybe they saw humans as we see insects, not even worth communicating with, just something to eliminate. Maybe their psychology was so alien that their motives would be incomprehensible to us. George Pal worried that audiences would be distracted by this question. If the invasion didn't make logical sense, Would people reject the film as nonsense? He consulted with military advisors, with scientists, even with psychologists, asking how a truly alien intelligence might think. Nobody could give him a definitive answer because, of course, nobody had ever met an alien intelligence. In the end, they decided to leave it mysterious. The narrator explains that the Martians were searching for a new world, but never explicitly states why they attack rather than attempt coexistence. The ambiguity was intentional. It made the Martians more alien, more unknowable. But it also did something else, something Pal didn't fully anticipate. It made the film a mirror. Audiences projected their own fears onto the Martians. In 1953, with Cold War tensions rising, many viewers saw the Martians as stand-ins for Soviet invaders, ruthless, powerful, ideologically opposed to everything American. Later generations saw them differently. Some saw environmental metaphors, advanced civilization destroying itself and then seeking to destroy others. Some saw colonialism, powerful outsiders devastating indigenous populations without understanding or caring about what they destroyed. The Martians became whatever fear was most present in the viewer's mind. This happened because the film never definitively answered the question of motive. The blankness at the story's center allowed each generation to fill it with their own anxieties. The question nobody could answer became the reason the film stayed relevant. Stories that explain everything stop being interesting once you know the answers. Stories that leave essential mysteries stay alive because each person who encounters them creates their own meaning. The War of the Worlds isn't really about Martians. It's about how we imagine threats, how we respond to the unknown, how we find courage when everything seems hopeless. It's about the small things defeating the powerful, about the importance of community and faith, about survival against impossible odds. And because the film leaves certain questions unanswered, it lets every viewer complete the story in their own way. The question nobody could answer became the film's greatest strength. Some mysteries are more powerful than any answer could ever be. Bonus fact: the library that preserved everything. Years after The War of the Worlds was released, something unusual happened in the film industry. Studios began throwing away their old props, costumes, and production materials to make room for new projects. Warehouses were cleared. Things were burned, discarded, sold as junk. Countless artifacts from Hollywood's golden age disappeared forever. But one person saw this happening and decided to do something about it. His name was Forrest J. Ackerman, and he was a science fiction superfan who had been collecting movie memorabilia since the 1930s. When he heard that Paramount Studios was planning to discard the props and models from The War of the Worlds, Ackerman contacted them and asked if he could save some items. The studio didn't care. As far as they were concerned, it was all junk from an old movie that nobody remembered anymore. They told him he could take whatever he wanted. Ackerman arrived at the warehouse with a truck and was stunned by what he found. There were the original Martian war machine models, battered and dusty but intact, the electronic probe that had terrorized characters in the farmhouse, concept paintings, production notes, even one of the Martian body props. He took everything he could fit in his truck and stored it all in his house, which he called the Ackermanian. Over the years, his house became an unofficial museum of science fiction history, packed floor to ceiling with props, posters, and memorabilia. He would give tours to fans and fellow collectors, showing them treasures from the golden age of science fiction cinema. The War of the Worlds items were some of his most prized possessions. He understood that these weren't just props. They were pieces of cultural history, objects that represented a moment when people dreamed about space and aliens and the future. Because of Ackerman's foresight, many original items from the film survived. When the 2005 remake was being developed, production designers visited collections of original props to study how the 1953 war machines were built. The old informed the new. Eventually, after Ackerman's death, his collection was sold and dispersed. with pieces going to various museums and private collectors. But the important thing is, they were preserved. In an alternate timeline where Ackerman didn't care, all of that would have been lost forever. One person's passion saved a piece of film history. The library wasn't a building or an institution. It was one man's dedication to remembering. Old tools, new magic. The past lived again through care. The War of the Worlds from 1953 remains powerful over 70 years after its release because it understood something essential about storytelling. The best stories aren't just about their plots or their special effects. They're about fundamental human experiences: fear, courage, love, survival, faith in something larger than ourselves. This movie showed humanity at its weakest and strongest. It showed our weapons failing, our cities burning, our certainty shattered. But it also showed people helping each other, refusing to give up, finding hope even in the darkest moments. It suggested that sometimes the smallest things matter most, that nature has a wisdom beyond our technology, that survival comes from places we don't expect. The filmmakers who created this movie worked with primitive tools compared to what we have now. No computers, no digital effects, just models and paint and imagination. Yet they created images that still haunt us, sounds that still send chills, moments that still resonate. They proved that limitations can inspire creativity, that problems force innovation, that sometimes not being able to do everything makes you think harder about what matters most. Every person who worked on this film, the actors, the effects artists, the painters, the sound designers, the narrator with his magnificent voice, left a piece of themselves in the final product. Their work outlived them. Their dreams became part of our shared culture. The movie reminds us that even the most impossible challenges can be overcome, that even when everything seems lost, survival is possible. It tells us that the powerful don't always win, that the smallest things can change everything, that there's wisdom in nature and value in faith and strength in community. These aren't just science fiction ideas. They're truths about being human. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time. The films we love are built from thousands of choices, accidents, struggles, and dreams. Behind every frame is a human story worth knowing. We'll keep telling them.